Well, at that time, there was a young professor of rhetoric in Milan named Augustine. And Augustine is a guy who is, well, let's just say he lived a life of a playboy, okay? And he was controlled by sexual lust. He freely discusses all this in a famous work that he wrote called Confessions, which is kind of a genre-starting work because it's the first time in history that we have someone writing out their story of their life and how they evolved and how they came to the spiritual position that they did. It's kind of like his intellectual odyssey and spiritual odyssey, okay, known as Confessions. It's a book that's widely read outside of Christian circles even till today. And so, anyway, he says in there that as he was struggling with all of his sexual passions and so forth, that he had embraced a view of the world known as Manichaeanism. Now, Manichaeanism was an ancient heresy, but it held that there are two forces in the world, a good force and a dark force, or a light force and a dark force, good and evil, and that these two metaphysical entities struggle with each other, and that metaphysical entity, those good and evil, struggle and they go right through you. And that's one of the reasons why you struggle in your soul and why sometimes you fall into sin and sometimes you do dark things, okay, is because of these two forces, okay. So he tried to explain evil this way. Well, eventually it led him nowhere. It led him to a dead end. And he could not overcome this struggle within him, and he was looking for a release from it. And so his mother, Monica, Saint Monica, who was a Christian and been praying for her son, said, why don't you go to church with me and listen to this man Ambrose preach? So Augustine thinks, okay, sure, I'll go hear him preach because I'm a rhetorician, he's a rhetorician, I'll see how he persuades people. But he didn't really want to go hear what the man had to say. But eventually he does start listening to what Ambrose was saying because Ambrose was speaking to the very problem that Augustine had. What did Ambrose say? He was saying that there is only one source for all being, and it's good, and this would be God. And that all evil, or everything that we perceive to be evil, is simply a corruption of the good. This is known as privation theory. It comes out of Neoplatonism, which was a philosophical school of thought that Ambrose had studied. That goes back through Origen and ultimately back through Philo and all the way to Plato. But anyway, the Neoplatonics taught that all things that exist come from a good source, and therefore anything that is evil is simply something good that has been twisted, corrupted, broken, and so forth. And so it is with us. We are corrupted. And so this is a metaphysic, by the way. It's a metaphysical explanation for why evil occurs or where evil comes from. Okay. Now, this catches Augustine's attention, and he is really paying attention here, and he's very interested. And so one day, as he's struggling, he's thinking through all these things. Mind you, this guy's an extremely intelligent fellow. Okay. He has a book with him, and it's the book of Romans. And he hears a little voice say, tome lege, which is a little child's voice. And he looks around, there's no child anywhere. He can't see anyone. He's totally isolated. But anyway, he picks up his Bible, the book of Romans, and he kind of puts his finger in the book of Romans. You know how some people put their finger in there and find a little place to read. Well, his finger landed on Romans 13, verses 13 and 14, and it says there, let us walk properly as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and sensuality, not in quarreling and jealousy, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires. This just hit him right between the eyes, and it had a deep spiritual impact upon his soul, and he determined right then and there in that very moment to go do that. And he did, and the world has not been the same since. Okay, it's unless you study Augustine, you read some of his works and see his enormous impact upon Western civilization through Christianity, it's hard to appreciate or understand how that is the case. But let's just take a look at some of the things and try to grasp his impact. Well, the magnitude of his influence is kind of hard to measure because, one, it's been 16 centuries long. It's a large impact. In other words, it had a lot of time to do its work and so forth. And it affects many different areas of thought. Even, for example, just war theory. Augustine, dealing with those Donatists, the schismatic and violent group that wanted to break away from the church, they were doing all kinds of terrorist acts and so forth. He came up with a doctrine of just war. That is, when is it proper for Christians to go to war? When is it moral to use violence? And moreover, what principles can one use violence in these cases? So that's just one example of many, many different areas that Augustine contributed to. But anyway, a rough outline of some of his contributions would have to touch upon his doctrine of the Trinity, the doctrine of original sin, his philosophy of history, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. We talk about the city of God, his views on ecclesiology, and many other areas of thought. A mere reading of De Civitate Dei, the city of God, leaves the mind reeling and spinning with a sort of a collage of ideas, insights and commentaries, visions and teachings that touch upon all kinds of different topics and so forth, okay? He even has a little, like 2 or 3 page in there, a theology of beards and why a person and why a man should wear a beard, okay? So it's kind of a 1,200 page long, everything that Augustine thinks kind of work. So it's a tour de force that envelops the whole scope of history right up to the sack of Rome in the year 410. And in 410, when Alaric and the Visigoths sacked Rome, it was kind of a 9/11 moment. Rome had become weak, they sacked the city of Rome, and it shocked the world. So Augustine writes the City of God as an apologetic work to explain why Christianity did not cause this fall. And so the book casts a vision of the whole scope of human history as a story of love, okay? Now, one cannot not love. You can't not love, according to Augustine. You must love, okay? But it really comes down to 2 things that you can love. You can either love God, as you should, or you can love yourself. Now, it can look like you're loving something else or someone else, but often it is self-love, okay? So these are really the ultimate 2 choices that you have. And so in the city of God, people love God. They orient themselves toward God. In the city of man, people love, but they love self, and they love their own desires and so forth. And what he will do is he will start with Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, and then trace all through history, all the way down to where he is there in the year 410, to explain how these 2 cities have not existed apart from each other, but they've been intermingled, like the wheat and the tares in the parable of the wheat and the tares that Jesus told. They're all intermingled there, okay? Now, his views in this book and on these 2 cities tie into his refutation of a heresy known as Pelagianism. Now, Pelagius was a British monk, and I've got to tie this in because really this ongoing debate on Pelagianism versus Augustinianism has many different episodes throughout the history of Christianity, but I'm going to tie it in here to the City of God briefly. Okay, and how there are 2 different cities anyway. Pelagius held that when everyone is born, you're born like a moral blank. You're not inclined to sin at all. You are like Adam, born before he fell. You have no proclivity to sin or no proclivity to not sin. And therefore, it's up to you. It's up to each individual to choose to live and please God and to love God. And if one does so through their choices, they attain salvation. If they don't, they don't. Okay? Augustine is going to go the opposite direction on this, and he's going to refute Pelagius. This is one of the big 3 controversies that Augustine jumped into and to solve, okay? And it's in response to Pelagius that he's going to come up with his doctrine of original sin. So Augustine taught that all people are sinful by nature now due to Adam's fall. We have all inherited a sinful nature from Adam. And thus we are non posse non peccare. That is, it's not possible for us to not sin because we have a fallen nature. Again, this is like that privation theory. Our nature, the imago Dei that we have, has been fractured, and now it can't do anything but mess up. It can't do anything but sin. And so, thus, God chooses who will be saved and who will be condemned. So this is the doctrine of predestination, and it is not a matter of our will. God alone determines which city we will inhabit, whether we'll be in the city of man or in the city of God. It's not up to us. Now, agree or not, and believe me, this is an extraordinarily controversial idea, and a lot of people have hotly agreed and hotly disagreed over the years. But this teaching has created a kind of a permanent theological axis around which many Christian denominations, movements, and teachers organize their thoughts. For example, both Luther and Calvin agreed with Augustine on this, and they revived that particular view and pushed it forward. So if time permitted, we could explore for hours many other aspects of the nearly inexhaustible Augustine, but we must move on.